At my granddaughter's wedding, my name wasn't just missing from the seating chart, it was erased like I had never belonged there at all. I noticed it the moment I stepped into the reception hall, the soft glow of crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, the kind of place where everything was supposed to feel warm, elegant, and full of love. I had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a pale lavender dress I hadn't worn since my husband was still alive, smoothing out every wrinkle as if it could somehow smooth the quiet ache that had followed me for the past 3 years. Emily had always loved that dress. She once told me it made me look like spring. I held on to that memory as I made my way toward the seating display, a large ivory board framed in gold, names written in neat, flowing calligraphy. I smiled politely at a couple passing by, their laughter light and easy, and then I began to scan the list. Table 3. Table 5. Table 8. I moved my finger slowly down each column, careful, methodical. I didn't rush. I never rush. Not anymore. When I reached the bottom of the first panel, I simply moved to the next. And then the next. My smile stayed exactly where it was, fixed, practiced. I checked again. Slower this time. Letter by letter. Collins. Carter. Dawson. Ellison. Names of distant relatives, business associates, even neighbors I barely recognized. Everyone had a place. Everyone had a chair waiting for them inside that room. Everyone except me. I paused, just for a second, and adjusted the small pearl bracelet on my wrist, the one my son Daniel had given me years ago before things between us became quieter. It would have been easy to assume it was a mistake. A simple oversight. Weddings are complicated, after all. Lists change. People forget. But mistakes feel different. Mistakes have a softness to them, a kind of accidental clumsiness. This felt precise. Clean. Intentional. I didn't react. I didn't frown. I didn't look around to see if anyone else had noticed. Instead, I stepped slightly to the side to let another guest approach the board, a young couple who leaned in close, smiling as they found their names together. Table 6, the woman whispered happily, linking her arm through his. I watched them walk away, their place secured, there. Belonging confirmed in a way mine no longer was. For a moment, I considered asking one of the staff. There was a young man nearby holding a stack of extra place cards, his expression already strained from answering too many questions. But I knew what he would do. He would look again. He would frown. He would apologize. And then he would turn to someone else. Someone who had made the list. Someone who had decided I didn't need to be on it. So I saved him the trouble. I turned away from the board and walked into the reception hall as if I already knew exactly where I was going. The room opened up in front of me, round tables dressed in white linen, each one marked with delicate centerpieces of roses and eucalyptus. I glanced at them as I passed. Table 2. Table 4. Table 7. Every seat filled or waiting to be filled. Every name printed neatly on a folded card. I kept walking. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was supposed to sit. No one seemed surprised to see me standing without a place. And that, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. I moved slowly between the tables, careful not to linger too long in any one place, as if I were simply stretching my legs or admiring the decorations. The room hummed with soft music and polite conversation, the gentle clinking of glasses blending into a kind of practiced happiness that felt almost rehearsed. I recognized many faces, some turning toward me with brief smiles that faded just as quickly when they realized they did not quite know what to say. A few nodded politely. Others looked past me, their attention drifting toward something easier, something more comfortable than acknowledging a woman standing without a place. I paused near table 6, the same table I had seen on the seating chart just moments before, and lightly touched the back of an empty chair. The name card resting on the plate read Dr. and Mrs. Henderson. I did not know them well, but I knew enough to understand they had been given a place here without question, without hesitation. I let my hand fall back to my side and continued walking. Across the room, I caught sight of Daniel standing near the bar, one hand wrapped around a glass, the other resting casually in his pocket. He was speaking to someone, laughing softly, his posture relaxed in a way I had not seen around me in years. For a brief moment, I considered walking over to him. It would have been simple. I could have asked, gently, where I was meant to sit. I could have given him the opportunity to correct whatever this was. But as I watched him turn slightly, his gaze shifting past me without stopping, I understood something I had not allowed myself to fully accept before. If this had been a mistake, he would have noticed already. If this had been unintentional, someone would have come looking for me. I did not exist on that list because no one had wanted me there in the first place. I adjusted the small clutch in my hand and moved toward the edge of the room, where a narrow table held glasses of water and folded napkins for guests to take at their convenience. I picked up a glass, not because I was thirsty, but because it gave my hands something to do, something steady. The cool surface grounded me as I took a small sip, my eyes drifting once more across the room. Emily stood at the center of it all, radiant in her white gown, surrounded by laughter and attention, exactly where she was meant to be. I watched her for a moment, searching her face for something familiar, something that belonged to me. But even from a distance, she felt far away, as if the space between us had been carefully arranged long before today. A woman brushed past me, her perfume lingering briefly in the air, and I stepped aside without thinking, making room for her the same way I had made room for everyone else. It was a small movement, almost invisible, but it settled something quietly inside me. I was not being overlooked. I was being positioned. And I had just begun to understand how deliberate that position truly was. I stood there a little longer than necessary, just far enough from the tables to avoid being in anyone's way, but close enough to see everything clearly. Conversations flowed around me in gentle waves, laughter rising and falling, glasses lifted, chairs pulled back as guests settled into their assigned places. I watched as a young server approached table 4 with a tray of champagne, carefully placing each glass in front of the correct seat, guided by the small printed cards that told him exactly who belonged where. There was something efficient about it, almost mechanical. Names matched to chairs. People matched to names. Order maintained without question. I took another slow sip of water and let my eyes drift across the room again, this time more carefully, more deliberately. That was when I began to notice the smaller things. Rachel stood near the head table, her posture straight, her smile polished, speaking with the event coordinator while occasionally glancing toward the seating area. Not scanning, not searching, but checking. Confirming. Her eyes moved with purpose, landing briefly on each table as if she were mentally ticking something off a list only she could see. At one point, her gaze passed over me. It did not pause. It did not soften. It simply moved on, as if I were part of the background, a piece of furniture that had always been there but never needed acknowledgement. I felt that more than anything else. Not anger. Not even hurt in the way I might have expected. Just clarity. A quiet, unmistakable clarity that settled in my chest like something long overdue. This had not started today. This moment, standing without a place, was not an isolated mistake or an unfortunate oversight. It was the result of something that had been building, quietly and carefully, for a long time. I thought back to last Christmas, when Rachel had insisted on hosting dinner but somehow forgot to tell me the time had changed until after it had already begun. I remembered Emily's birthday the year before, when I arrived with a gift and found the celebration nearly over, candles already blown out, photos already taken. At the time, I had accepted each moment the way I always had, with patience, with understanding, telling myself that families get busy, that schedules overlap, that no one means to leave anyone out. I had explained it away so many times that it had begun to sound true, even to me. But standing here now, watching Rachel coordinate the room with quiet authority, I could no longer pretend I did not see the pattern. Each small exclusion had been placed carefully, like stepping stones leading to this exact moment. A wedding where every seat was accounted for. Every name carefully written. Every guest intentionally placed. Except for one. I lowered my glass and set it gently on the edge of the narrow table beside me, making sure it did not make a sound. There was no need to draw attention. Not yet. Instead, I folded my hands in front of me and took a slow breath, letting the noise of the room fade just slightly as my thoughts sharpened. This was not about a chair. It had never been about a chair. It was about being quietly removed, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to remove. And the most remarkable part was not that it had happened. It was that I had allowed it to happen for so long without question. I lifted my head slightly and looked across the room once more, this time not as a guest searching for her place, but as someone beginning to understand exactly where she stood. I shifted my weight slightly and let my gaze rest on the head table, where everything seemed brighter, more deliberate, as if the entire room revolved around that single line of white linen and polished silver. Emily stood there now, laughing at something one of her bridesmaids had said, her hand lightly resting on the edge of the table as though she had always belonged exactly there. I studied her face, searching for the child I once knew, the little girl who used to sit beside me at my kitchen counter, swinging her legs while I baked cookies on Sunday afternoons. Back then, she used to ask me questions about everything. Why the sky changed color at sunset. Why sugar made things sweet. Why her father always called me before making big decisions. Those questions had faded over the years, replaced by shorter conversations, then fewer visits, and eventually, polite distance that neither of us ever addressed out loud. I remembered the first time Rachel came into our family, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, always composed, always just slightly ahead of every situation. At the time, I admired that about her. I thought Daniel had chosen well. She was organized, thoughtful, attentive in ways that made everything seem easier. Holidays ran smoothly. Plans were made early. Details were never forgotten. It took me a long time to realize that being in control of the details also meant controlling who was included in them. I could trace it now, step by step, like a trail I had walked without noticing. The first time I was not asked to host Thanksgiving. The year I was told it would be simpler if I did not bring anything, just come and enjoy. The quiet shift from being at the center of family gatherings to being a guest who arrived and left without much consequence. None of it had felt harsh on its own. Each moment had been small, almost reasonable. But together, they formed something much clearer, something I could no longer ignore. I watched as Rachel leaned in to speak with the coordinator again, pointing subtly toward one of the tables, her tone calm, precise, leaving no room for confusion. She did not need to raise her voice. Everything moved the way she intended without effort. I wondered, not for the first time, how many conversations had taken place without me, how many decisions had been made in rooms I was no longer invited into. My fingers brushed lightly against the fabric of my dress, feeling the familiar texture beneath my hand, grounding me in the present moment. I had chosen this dress because it reminded me of who I used to be, someone who had a place, not just in a room, but in the lives of the people standing here tonight. That version of me had not disappeared. She had simply been moved, quietly and carefully, until she was no longer visible. I let out a slow breath and straightened my shoulders just slightly, a small adjustment that no one else would notice but that shifted something inside me. Across the room, Daniel finally turned in my direction again, but this time, his eyes slid past me just as they had before, settling on someone else, someone who belonged to the life he was living now. There was no hesitation. No confusion. Just certainty. And in that moment, I understood something with complete clarity. This was not about being forgotten. It was about being replaced in ways so subtle that no one felt the need to explain it. I lowered my gaze for a brief second, then lifted it again, calmer than before, steadier. I had spent years adjusting to their changes, adapting to their choices, making myself smaller so everything else could remain comfortable. But standing here now, with no seat and no name, I could finally see the shape of what had been happening all along. And more importantly, I could see where it would lead if I continued to stand still. I was about to step further into the room, to continue that quiet, careful movement I had perfected over the years, when a voice behind me broke through the steady hum of conversation. "Margaret?" It was soft, uncertain, but familiar enough to make me pause. I turned slightly and found Linda Harper standing just a few feet away, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and concern. She had always been observant, even years ago when our children were still in school together. The kind of person who noticed what others overlooked, not because she was looking for problems, but because she paid attention. "I thought you would be seated already," she said, her eyes briefly scanning the room before returning to me. I offered a small smile, the same one I had been wearing all evening. "So did I replied, keeping my tone even, almost light. She hesitated, just for a moment, and then stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I looked at the seating chart earlier," she said quietly. "I did not see your name." There was no accusation in her voice, no dramatic reaction, just a simple statement of fact. That made it heavier somehow. I nodded once, a small acknowledgement that required no explanation. "Neither did I said. Linda's brow furrowed just slightly, the way it used to when she was trying to solve something that did not quite make sense. "That does not seem right," she added, almost to herself. I could have agreed with her. I could have allowed that moment to become something else, something louder, something that might have drawn attention or forced an answer from someone who had carefully avoided giving one. But I did not. "Weddings are complicated," I said instead, the words coming out smoother than I expected. "There are a lot of details." Linda studied me for a second longer, her eyes searching my face as if she were looking for the part of me that would confirm what she was already thinking. And I knew she saw it. Not in my expression, but in what was missing from it. The absence of confusion. The absence of surprise. "Rachel handled the seating," she said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper now. "She was very particular about it. She had the final list printed herself this morning." I felt that settle quietly into place, like the last piece of something that had already been forming long before tonight. I did not react. I did not look toward Rachel. I did not need to. "I see," I said simply. Linda exhaled softly, glancing toward the head table where Rachel stood once more, composed and effortless in her role. "Do you want me to say something?" she asked. There was a sincerity in her voice that might have meant something to me once, an offer of support, of intervention, of fairness. But fairness was not what this room had been designed for. Not tonight. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "That will not be necessary." She hesitated again, clearly unsure whether to accept that answer, but eventually she nodded, respecting the boundary I had set without fully understanding it. "If you need anything," she began, then stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished. I gave her a small, appreciative look. "I am fine," I said. And for the first time that evening, I realized I meant it, though not in the way she might have assumed. Linda lingered for a moment longer before being called away by someone at her table, her attention pulled back into the world where names were written and places were assigned. I watched her go, then turned my gaze forward again, toward the center of the room, where everything continued exactly as planned. The music shifted slightly, signaling the next part of the evening, and guests began to settle more firmly into their seats, their places confirmed, their roles understood. I remained where I was, still standing, still without a chair, but no longer uncertain about why. And as I looked across the room once more, I understood something that had not been clear to me before. This was not just about being left out. It was about being deliberately removed by someone who believed I no longer had the power to step back in. I remained where I was as the evening began to move forward without me, the rhythm of the event unfolding exactly as it had been planned, each moment flowing neatly into the next. A soft chime echoed through the room, signaling that dinner service was about to begin, and almost immediately, guests began to take their seats with quiet efficiency. Chairs slid gently against the floor, napkins unfolded, conversation softened into a polite murmur as attention shifted toward the head table. I watched it all with a stillness that no longer felt uncertain. It felt deliberate. A server approached the edge of the room, glancing briefly in my direction before continuing on, his path already decided by the structure laid out in front of him. There was no confusion in his movement, no hesitation. He knew where everyone belonged because someone had already made those decisions for him. I turned slightly and walked toward a narrow space near one of the pillars, just outside the direct flow of the tables, where I could see the room without being part of it. From there, everything looked almost symmetrical, almost perfect. Plates aligned. Glasses filled. Names placed with intention. It would have been beautiful if I had not known what it cost to create that kind of order. I rested my hand lightly against the smooth surface of the pillar and let my gaze settle once more on Rachel. She was seated now, poised at the head table, her posture straight, her expression composed as she leaned slightly toward Daniel, saying something that made him nod in quiet agreement. They looked like a united front, the kind that leaves no space for anything outside of it. For a moment, I studied Daniel more closely, not as the man standing there tonight, but as the boy he used to be, the one who would run into the house after school and call out for me before he even set his bag down. That boy had always known where to find me. He had never needed a list, or a name card, or a carefully arranged seat. He had simply known that I was there. Somewhere along the way, that certainty had been replaced with something else, something quieter, something that no longer reached in my direction at all. I let that thought pass without holding on to it. There was no value in tracing that distance any further tonight. Not when something far more important had just become clear. I was not standing here because I had nowhere to sit. I was standing here because someone believed I would accept that position without question. Because someone believed that I would continue to adjust, to make space, to disappear just enough to keep everything else running smoothly. That belief had been earned over time. I had given it to them, piece by piece, every time I chose silence over discomfort, every time I told myself that keeping the peace mattered more than being seen. But standing here now, with the entire room laid out in front of me, I could see the flaw in that thinking. Peace that requires one person to vanish is not peace at all. It is convenience. And convenience has a way of becoming expectation if it is never challenged. I straightened slightly, letting my shoulders settle into a posture that felt unfamiliar and yet entirely natural at the same time. Across the room, the first course was being served, plates placed carefully in front of each guest, each movement following the plan that had been set long before any of us arrived. I watched as the servers moved from table to table, never once looking in my direction, never once pausing to question whether someone had been left out. And I realized, with a calm that surprised even me, that this moment was not something I needed to fix. It was something I needed to understand. Because once I understood it fully, completely, there would be no confusion about what came next. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, not because anything had improved, but because I had finally stopped pretending that it would.